Thank you, everyone. My name is Arkan Fung, and I'm the Academic Dean of the Harvard Kennedy School. I want to begin by thanking the organizers of the African Development Conference and the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum and the government and the people of Niger for sparing the president for a few days so that he might share his wisdom with us. As you have just heard, this is an event that opens the African Development Conference, which is absolutely central to the mission of the Harvard Kennedy School. It's a core part of what we do. The mission of the Harvard Kennedy School is to train exceptional leaders and to foster ideas that help solve the world's most pressing problems. That is exactly what the African Development Conference is aiming to do. We do that in many ways. We do that, of course, through our educational programs, and we do that through our research, but we also do that through our convening. And I'm very proud on the behalf of the rest of the faculty and staff at the Harvard Kennedy School to offer our space as a convening for the African Development Conference for the important work that you are about to do on producing public value through partnerships in the public and private sectors, working on critical issues of resources, security, and development generally. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce His Excellency President Issoufou Mahamadou of Niger. President Mahamadou was born in Niger in 1952. He studied engineering in France during the 1970s, and he later served as Director of Mines in Niger from 1980 to 1985. In 1990, he helped found the Nigerian Party for Democracy and Socialism, and in the first year that Niger held multi-party elections in 1993, he won his first seat in Parliament. 1 year later, he became Prime Minister of Niger and served until 1994. He resigned in 1994 because of new legislation that limited the powers of the Prime Minister, and he resigned as a result of ongoing conflicts within the ruling coalition. A couple of years later, a military coup occurred, and General Ibrahim Barre won the 1996 elections, which were marked by severe irregularities. Because of the contested results, Mahamadou Issoufou was unlawfully jailed and placed under house arrest several times between 1996 and 1997. In 2009, Issoufou Mahamadou was part of a large-scale demonstrations against the administration of then-President Tandja, who refused to step down. Because of his participation in demonstrations, he was again detained. In 2011, in his fifth run for president, he won with 58% of the vote, pledging to restore democracy in Niger. That 2011 election marked, many people say, Niger's democratic transition moment and hopefully the beginning of a long-lasting consolidation of democratic practices in his country. He has accomplished many things for Niger over his presidency and administration, including under his leadership, Niger has strengthened freedom of press, assembly, and religion. In terms of economic development, poverty reduction, food security, and protecting rural livelihoods have been important priorities for this administration. In the region, not just in Niger, President Mahamadou has helped to increase African stability by committing to peacekeeping troops in Mali, combating threats from groups like Boko Haram, and serving as a focal point for regional cooperation more broadly. For these and other accomplishments, he has recently been nominated to receive the 2015 Chatham House Prize for the person in the whole world who has contributed the most to international relations over the past year. He has stiff competition in that regard, competing with Angela Merkel, Chancellor Angela Merkel, and Médecins Sans Frontières. But we wish you the very best in that competition. It is my great honor, therefore, to welcome President Issoufou Mahamadou to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Mesdames et messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen,
c'est la deuxième fois que je viens
It
à Cambridge.
is my second visit to Cambridge.
La première fois,
The first time
c'était
I
en
came
1981.
was
fait
in
vieux.
1983.
Il y a de
1983.
cela 34
That was almost 34
J'étais
years ago.
venu
It's a long time ago.
visiter MIT
I came to visit MIT
dans le cadre d'un voyage d'études
as part of
de 40
a
jours
study
aux
tour
États-Unis
of 40 days in the US
sur le cycle du combustible
about
nucléaire,
nuclear fuel
de la mine à la gestion des déchets,
and how to
en
process
passant par
waste
l'usine de traitement,
through a
par
processing
l'usine de conversion,
and conversion
les centres
plant
d'enrichissement
so as to
et les
manage
centrales nucléaires.
the way to enrich
alors,
nuclear fuel.
Directeur
I
des
was
mines
then in
Niger.
charge of the mining department
aussi,
in
déjà
Niger. I also
membre
was
d'un groupe
a member
politique
of
clandestin.
an
Créé
unofficial
en 1980.
political group created in
On
1980.
l'appelait le G80.
It was called the G80,
l'objectif
G80,
était
and its
D'apporter
objective
le changement
was
au Niger.
to bring about change for Niger,
au-delà,
and beyond
d'apporter le changement
that,
en Afrique.
to bring about change for all of Africa.
Je n'imaginais pas
I did not imagine
Alors,
then
que
that
je reviendrais
I would come back
dans cette ville
to Cambridge
en qualité de
as
président.
head of
de la
head of
République,
state,
du Niger.
president of the Republic of Niger.
Permettez-moi de remercier
Let me take a minute
les
to thank
autorités de votre prestigieuse
the
université,
administration of
la
your
présidente
university, and especially
Dr.
the president,
Drew Faust
Dr. Drew Faust,
et le doyen
and the
de
dean
la Kennedy
of the
School
Kennedy School,
et Government,
and
Dr. David Elwood,
Dr. David Elwood,
qui ont bien
who
voulu
were
m'inviter
kind enough to invite
au
me
forum John Kennedy
to the John Kennedy
En vue de
Forum
participer
in
à
order
une
to take
discussion
part in
sur
a
l'avenir de
discussion about the future
travers,
of Africa
la vision
through the
que
vision
j'ai pour le Niger
I have for
et son
Niger
rôle.
and
dans la
its
région.
role in the sub-region.
Permettez-moi aussi
Uh,
de dire
Let
combien
me
je suis
also
heureux
say
de
how
m'adresser
happy I am
à cette
to talk
assemblée d'étudiants
to this public
de
of
l'Institut
students of the
et
Harvard
de l'école Kennedy,
Institute and
de
the
Harvard.
Kennedy School,
ainsi que des membres
as well as
de la communauté locale.
members of the local community.
La vision que j'ai
The
de
vision
l'avenir du
I
Niger
have of the future for Niger
et celle que j'ai de
is,
l'avenir de
and that
l'Afrique
I have for the
se
rest of
confondent.
Africa, are,
Car le Niger
merged because
n'a
Niger
pas d'avenir
does not have
en
any
dehors
future
d'une Afrique
beyond
unie
that of a
et
united
solidaire.
and solidary
Et pour
Africa.
moi, le
And
premier
for me,
président du Ghana
first,
l'a
the
bien
first
dit,
president of Ghana said it right,
et je suis d'accord avec lui.
and I totally agree with him.
L'Afrique doit s'unir.
He said Africa must unite.
L'Afrique doit
Africa
s'unir
must
ou périr.
unite or it will perish.
La division
The
a de tout
division
était
has
le talon d'Achille
always been
du continent.
the Achilles heel of the
La
continent.
balkanisation de l'Afrique,
The balkanization of
suite,
Africa,
à la conférence de Berlin,
following the Berlin
tenue
Conference
en
in
1885,
1885 by the colonial powers,
a entraîné
brought
des
about
conséquences désastreuses,
disastrous
pour le
consequences for the continent.
conséquences qui sont
And
venues
these
s'agréger
effects have
à
coalesced
celles déjà plus
and have
anciennes,
been added to other problems
provoquées
faced
par,
by the continent,
plusieurs siècles
caused
d'esclavage,
by a number of
qui ont
centuries of
saigné
slavery,
l'Afrique,
which
ses
bled
bras valides.
Africa and
La traite
led
atlantique,
to the loss
dans le
of
cadre
many
du
hardworking
commerce
Africans through
Et la
the
traite
triangular
orientale,
trade
ce que nous
with
souvent,
which brought about
ont
slavery in
concerné
the US,
plusieurs
in North
dizaines de
America.
millions d'Africains.
Several scores of
pillage de
millions
ressources
of
humaines
Africans have
est venu
not been
s'ajouter
able to help
celui
African development
des
because they
ressources
were
naturelles
sent as
du
slaves
continent.
to the new
Pillage
world.
qui
In
se
addition,
poursuit malheureusement
many natural
d'autres
resources of
formes
the continent have
encore aujourd'hui.
been stolen by the
L'Afrique
colonial powers, and there's
a
still
été dépossédée de ses
continuation
ressources
of this
humaines et
movement.
naturelles.
So Africa has
Le plus
lost
souvent,
human and
en
mineral
contrepartie
resources
de
in
miroirs,
exchange for
d'épingles
really nothing,
et autres
a
pacotilles.
little object of no
Les périodes
value
de
whatsoever.
l'esclavage
The time of slavery
et de la colonisation
and colonization
ont été
were
une immense malédiction pour l'Afrique.
a tremendous curse
D'ailleurs,
for Africa.
Le pire,
In fact, the worst
dans cette
the
affaire,
worst in this
n'est ni le
situation
pillage de nos ressources
was not
naturelles,
the theft
ni
of our
celui
natural
des
resources
ressources humaines.
or human
Le
resources.
pire,
The worst
c'est
has been
l'aliénation,
alienation
l'asservissement de l'esprit,
and the fact
la
that
perte de confiance en soi,
Africans have
dans
lost
lesquels
confidence in themselves
des
and in their
esclaves
civilizations.
et le traumatisme
The
colonial
slave trade has been
ont installé
very
les
bad
peuples africains.
in more ways than
L'Afrique
one, and Africa is
a
still
été
paying the
violée,
price right now.
défigurée,
Africa has
opprimée,
been violated, has been
humiliée,
lowered,
méprisée.
humiliated,
Aujourd'hui
and
encore,
today still
elle est victime
it is the
de
victim
tous les clichés
of all the
et de
clichés
tous les stéréotypes.
and all the stereotypes that you know.
N'oublions pas
Let's not
Frantz Fanon.
forget Frantz Fanon.
Frantz Fanon
Frantz Fanon
et les damnés de la terre.
and
Frantz
his
Fanon,
book, The Damned
Dans
of
son
the
célèbre
Earth,
livre
and his famous
Peau
book,
noire, masque blanc, qui décrit très bien
Black Skin,
le
White
processus
Mask,
d'aliénation
which describes
des Africains
the process
l'esclavage
of alienation
et sous la
of
colonisation.
Africans under
N'oublions
colonization
pas
and
aussi
slavery. Let us not
cet
forget
auteur célèbre,
what another
Aimé Césaire,
famous
son
author
grand
said,
discours
Aimé Césaire,
sur le colonialisme.
in his speech
qui disait, je
about
cite,
colonialism. He said, I
Je veux
quote,
parler
I want to talk
de ces millions d'hommes
about those millions of
à
people
qui on a inculqué savamment la peur,
who have been taught
le complexe
fear,
d'infériorité,
a complex of
le tremblement,
inferiority,
l'agenouement,
and forcing
désespoir
them to,
et le
leading them to
darwinisme.
despair
Fin de
and
citation.
to
Il faut
behave
donc,
like a servant.
que
End of
l'Afrique se
quote.
redresse,
So Africa must
renaisse,
stand up, and there has to
et
be a
retrouve
renaissance of
sa
Africa.
personnalité,
Africa
sa fierté,
must
son
find
identité.
its identity again,
C'est pourquoi,
its pride.
depuis
This is
4
why,
ans
for the last 4 years,
que j'ai l'honneur
where have
diriger le
been
Niger,
I've had the chance
je
to
m'efforce
be in
de
charge of
redonner
the country of
confiance
Niger. I'm trying
aux
to
Nigériens.
give confidence again
En effet,
to the population of my
la
country,
cause profonde de notre
because
situation,
the root
réside
cause
en
of our
nous-mêmes.
problem is within
l'histoire de
ourselves.
l'Afrique,
The history of
illustre
Africa
bien
and the Africans
la pertinence de l'aphorisme de
shows
Sun Tzu.
what
Certainement
Sun
le connaissez,
Tzu
ce
said,
grand penseur
a
chinois
Chinese
qui a
thinker,
écrit en particulier l'art de la guerre.
said, who wrote a book
Selon
about the art
lequel,
of war, but he said
Dans un
also,
combat,
in a fight,
on est toujours vaincu
we are always
Par sa propre
defeated by your
Et
own
vainqueur
faults,
par la faute de l'adversaire.
and if you win, it is because of
En effet,
faults committed by
il y a eu
or
cette,
errors committed by the
une
the
résistance
person
à
you fight.
l'esclavage.
There have been a
Mais les
resistance
Africains
to
ont été acteurs de la
slavery,
traite.
but many
eu
Africans have
certes
took part in the
résistance à la
slave trade.
colonisation.
There was some
Comme le
resistance
prouve,
to
pour
colonization.
citer quelques exemples,
I can give
le
just a
combat
few
mené
examples.
contre la pénétration coloniale
The fight
par
against
Samori Touré
of
et la
Famori
reine
Touré
Saronia Mangou
and
en Afrique
Queen
occidentale,
Samara Tango in
plus
West
précisément
Africa,
au Niger,
in Niger especially,
s'agissant de cette dernière,
in the
ainsi que
latter case,
par
as
les
well
Zoulous.
as the fight by the
dirigé par
Zulus
Chaka en
of
Afrique
Chaka
du Sud.
in southern Africa. But
Mais c'est avec
but
des soldats
it is
dits indigènes
with what they call indigenous
par une poignée
soldiers,
d'aventuriers
African
européens
soldiers
que l'Afrique
under
a
the
été
control
conquise.
of a few European
Chers
adventurers. And so Africans
Mon
fought
objectif
against other Africans
est de
to
faire
help
renaître
with
le
colonialism. My
au-delà,
objective is the rebirth
de
of
contribuer
Niger, and beyond that,
à la renaissance
to
du
contribute
continent.
to the renaissance of
Pour
the
ce faire,
continent. For that
il est
purpose,
important
it
de
is
méditer
important
notre histoire
to
afin d'en tirer les
know
leçons,
and meditate on our history in
permettront
order to draw
de
lessons
mieux construire
so as
notre
to
avenir.
better build our future
Pour renaître,
in order to create
Nous
this
devons
rebirth.
cesser
We must
de
cease
douter de nous-mêmes.
from
Nous devons
doubting of
retrouver
ourselves.
cette
We
confiance
must
en soi,
find
indispensable
this
aux
indispensable
grandes actions. Nous
self-confidence
devons
to
avoir
act.
une vision.
We must have a vision.
Nous devons
We must
nous prendre en charge.
take charge of
affirmer
ourselves
un leadership.
and assert our
Nous
leadership.
devons promouvoir
We
des
must
valeurs.
promote
Nous
values.
devons, pour paraphraser
To
le
quote
président Kennedy,
again
qui a
President
commencé
Kennedy,
l'âge
who
de
was
gloire,
a former
de
student
Harvard,
of Harvard, if I am
nous
correct,
demander
we have to
ce
ask
que nous devons faire
what we can do
pour nos pays
to help our country
non
and not
ce que nos pays
ask what
doivent faire
our
pour nous.
country can do for us.
C'est dans cette perspective
It is in this
que nous
perspective
mettons en œuvre le
that
programme de
we are
renaissance du Niger.
implementing the Renaissance
Depuis
program
maintenant
for
4 ans.
Niger. We have been doing that for the last 4
Le
years.
premier défi
The first
que nous
challenge
affrontons
that we have to
est
overcome
celui de la construction
is
d'un
that
État démocratique fort
of the
et
construction of strong institutions,
État
democratic
capable
institutions,
stable, de garantir
a state
aux
that
citoyens
would
la
be
liberté et le
able
progrès
to guarantee
économique et social
economic and social progress and liberty
face
to the
ces
population. But the
il
problem
m'arrive
is
de penser
that
à Hegel,
sometimes I think of
Hegel,
Hegel.
qui a postulé
Hegel
que c'est
who
l'existence de
said
l'État
that it is the existence
qui
of
fait
the
entrer les
state
peuples dans
which
l'histoire
enable
et qui a
people
prétendu que l'Afrique,
to enter history.
à
And
laquelle
he claimed that Africa,
manquerait cette condition, ne serait
because
pas
it didn't
entrée dans
have
l'histoire.
states, would not have been part
Oh.
of history because of the lack of
Au
state
moment où
institutions.
Hegel écrivait,
But when Hegel wrote
l'Afrique connaissait
this,
des États depuis des siècles.
Africa has already
Voire des
had
millénaires.
already known governments for centuries or millennia.
Il a
But
oublié
Hegel didn't know that or forgot
D'abord,
that.
que
He
l'Égypte,
forgot that Egypt,
qui était dirigée
which
pendant
was
longtemps
led for
par des
many
pharaons noirs,
years by
en
black
Afrique.
pharaohs, is in Africa.
il ne connaissait
He
peut-être pas
maybe
l'existence
didn't know the
de
existence
l'empire du Ghana,
of the Ghana Empire,
qu'on appelait aussi
which
l'empire de Ouagadougou,
was also called the
qui a
Ouagadougou
existé
Empire,
du
which
3e siècle
existed
avant Jésus-Christ
from the 3rd century
au
BCE
11e siècle après Jésus-Christ.
to the 11th century
Il ne
of
connaissait
our
peut-être
era.
pas
Maybe he didn't know
l'existence
the existence
de l'empire du Mali,
of the Mali Empire,
qui a existé entre
which
le
existed
13e
between the 13th
et le 16e
and
siècle,
the 16th century,
ni celle
or that
de l'empire Songhai,
of the Songhai Empire,
15e, 16e siècle,
15th and 16th
ou
century,
l'existence des États Hausa,
or the Hausa states
12e, 15e siècle,
from the 12th to 15th century,
l'existence
or the existence
de l'empire du Kanem Bornou,
of the Kana
8e,
Bornu
19e siècle,
government in
ou encore
19th century,
l'existence
or
de Nupé,
that of Nupe,
du
the
Congo,
Ife and the Congo,
et plus proche de nous,
and closer to us,
de l'empire de Sokoto,
the Sokoto
qui
Empire,
était à cheval
which was
entre
straddling
l'actuel Niger,
the border
l'actuel Nigeria,
between Nigeria,
l'actuel Tchad.
Niger,
et
and
l'actuel
Chad
Cameroun.
and Cameroon.
Ces États
Those states
n'avaient rien à envier
were
aux États qui
at the
existaient
same
à la
level
même
as
époque
many
en Occident.
states which existed at the
Malheureusement.
same time in the Western world.
Malheureusement, la
Unfortunately,
colonisation
colonization
a interrompu le processus
interrupted
endogène
the inner
évolution.
process of evolution in
et leur
Africa
a substitué
and replaced it
l'État répressif
with
colonial
the repressive colonial
lequel
states
les Africains
under which
étaient non
Africans
pas des citoyens,
were not
mais
citizens,
des sujets.
but subjects.
Le Léviathan,
The
vous connaissez
Leviathan, you know Hobbes?
le Léviathan de
The
Hobbes
Leviathan of Hobbes
peut prendre des visages différents.
can have different
les lieux et le
faces
temps.
depending on the time and
En
the
Afrique,
place. In Africa,
Au lendemain des indépendances, la
after
plupart des visages
independence, the first
des
face
régimes dictatoriaux,
of Africa was
soit militaire,
dictatorial
soit
states,
des
either
partis uniques.
military strongmen
Depuis
or
25 ans,
single
L'Afrique
party
vit
government.
une
For the last
transition vers la
25 years,
démocratie,
Africa has been
avec des
engaged
fortunes diverses
in
selon
to
les pays.
a democratic transition
Comment
with
sortir
varying degrees of success
des
depending on the
dictatures mises en
country
place
in order to get
lendemain
out
des
of the
indépendances
structure of
et
dictatorships that
construire
was
la
created
démocratie
after independence
sans
in order
affaiblir les
to
États.
build a democracy
sont
without
les
weakening
termes du
the
défi.
existing states. This is
Dans certains
the
pays,
challenge we have to overcome.
L'histoire
In
démocratique
some countries, the
est celle des
democratic
conflits
history
post-électoraux
is that of
liés à des élections truquées.
post-electoral fighting
que dans
because
d'autres,
of
l'État s'est
unfair
effondré,
elections. But in
où
other
des coups d'État
countries,
ont
there's no
provoqué
more
un
state
refus
anymore.
du processus
And
démocratique.
in some other states,
On évoque
there's a
aussi
refusal of a democratic
la
process, or it's a
corruption des
fake
dirigeants africains,
democratic process.
l'impunité,
Another problem is
les
also
conflits ethniques
corruption and
et régionalistes,
of government,
guerres
ethnic
civiles,
and regionalist
les
conflicts,
conflits
civil wars,
frontaliers,
border
les régimes
conflicts.
dynastiques. Pour conclure,
To
l'Afrique
conclude
n'est pas mûre
that Africa,
pour la
say
démocratie.
some people, is not ripe for
va
democracy.
jusqu'à évoquer le climat.
Some people mentioned also
Il ne serait pas
climate,
favorable à ce
thinking
type de
that
régime,
saying that climate
mais
is not
plutôt
favorable for
aux hommes
democracy,
tempérés.
but is better
On
for
oublie
strong men. it will be forgetting that advanced democracy which exists
ont été construites
today
de longue haleine.
were not built
Pour prendre
overnight.
un exemple,
To take an example,
entre la Révolution
between the
française
French Revolution
1789
of 1789
et l'instauration
and the
du suffrage universel
instauration
en
of
France, c'est-à-dire le vote des
voting
femmes,
for everybody, including women
qui
in
n'a été
France,
acquis
which was
qu'en
only
1945,
acquired in
46,
1946,
il s'est passé plus de
there
150
have been more than
Entre
150
ces deux
years
dates,
between these two
il
dates.
y a eu le premier empire,
In
Il y a eu
that
la
period, there was the
restauration,
First Empire
la
and
monarchie
the
de
restoration
Juillet,
of the monarchy,
la Deuxième
the
République,
July monarchy, the
Second
Second
Empire,
Republic, the
la
Second
Commune de Paris,
Empire, the
et la
Paris
Troisième
Commune, and the Third Republic.
Je ne pense pas
I don't think
que la
that
démocratie
democracy
prendra autant de temps.
will take just as long in order to take roots in Africa,
La tendance
because right now
est
already
globalement
the trend is
démocratie.
toward the
Dans
spread
tous les pays
of
du continent.
democratic values in all the countries of the continent.
Avant-hier, vous parliez
The
sur
organization, if you know,
le
like
28 mars
on March 28th
2015 au Nigeria,
in Nigeria,
première puissance économique
which is the
du
first
continent,
economic power
élections
of the
libres,
continent, they were for the first time
transparentes et
free,
honnêtes,
transparent, and fair
avec réalisation
election.
de l'alternance à la tête de
And
l'État,
we saw alternance at the head of the state, and this comforts me
de l'Afrique, de la
because I
démocratie.
think the future of Africa is for democracy.
Au Niger,
In Niger,
le processus de mise en
The
œuvre d'institutions démocratiques
democratic
fortes
process and the
a
creation
connu
of
des
strong
périodes de flux
democratic
et de reflux.
institution has not
Depuis
been
4 ans,
linear. For the last 4
Nous
years,
sommes dans une phase de flux
we have been
avec
in a
une
period
amélioration de la gouvernance
marked
politique et
by
économique du pays,
improvements
travers
of the
l'élargissement des
economic
libertés,
and political governance of the
notamment celle
country
de la presse,
through more
l'instauration
freedoms,
de
especially
l'égalité
press
des
freedom,
et des devoirs des
equality
citoyens,
of the
le
rights
renforcement
and
de l'état de
stressing
droit,
the duties of
la lutte
citizens,
contre la corruption,
strengthening of the state of
le
law,
renforcement des
the rule of
capacités
law,
de
strengthening of
l'administration,
the capabilities
la restauration
of
du monopole
the
fiscal de
institution,
l'État
state
et
institution,
de l'efficacité
and increase in
dépense
efficiency in collecting
Tous les
revenues
indicateurs,
and spending
internationaux
money. All
qui permettent de
international
mesurer le niveau de
indicators
bonne
confirm
gouvernance le
that,
couvrent,
and they show that the
notamment
level of governance is
l'indicateur de
very high
reporters
in
sans frontières
Niger. The
la
indicator
liberté de la
from
presse,
Reporters Without Borders
fait du
about
Niger
press freedom
le 5e
makes
plus
Niger
libre
the fifth
d'Afrique en
country,
2013.
fifth most free country
L'indice,
in Africa in 2013.
L'indice
The
de
index
perception de la corruption
of perception of
de
corruption
Transparency International montre que
from
le
Transparency International
Niger a
shows that
gagné une
Niger
trentaine de rangs
went
en
up
4 ans
30
2011
places,
et 2014
30 places between 2011 and 2014, and I'm in agreement
avec votre président, le président
with
américain, le
your
président Obama.
President Obama,
Quand il dit que
when he said
l'Afrique
that Africa
a besoin
needs
d'institutions démocratiques fortes.
strong democratic
Et non pas d'hommes
institutions
forts.
and not strong men.
L'avenir de l'Afrique
The
et du
future
Niger
of Africa and the future of
est dans
Niger
la démocratie.
are
Car
in democracy,
en dépit de
because
certains
in
effets
spite
pervers,
of certain
la rivalité des
perverse
partis politiques, elle
effects
autorise
and the rivalry of political
l'équilibre des
parties
pouvoirs
are
qu'elle
sometimes
implique
dangerous, and the balance of
permettent
power that is
au
implied
pouvoir, comme on le sait,
enable
d'arrêter le pouvoir, comme disait Montesquieu.
something like Montesquieu said,
Le deuxième
we
défi
should not have
que nous nous sommes
absolute
fixés
power because it will be
est de
corrupted.
garantir aux
The
citoyens
second challenge we have set for
le droit à
ourselves
la
is to
paix
guarantee
et à
our
la
citizens
sécurité.
the right to peace and
Nous y
security.
sommes jusqu'ici
We
parvenus.
have managed to do
En
it
dépit
so
d'un
far in
environnement
spite
régional
of
défavorable.
an unfavorable regional
le savez,
environment.
situé
As
en
you know,
Afrique de l'Ouest,
Niger is in Western
appartient à la
Africa,
fois à la zone
but it is also
sahélo-saharienne,
part of the Sahel,
une zone qui s'étend
an area
de
which
la Mauritanie au Soudan,
goes from Mauritania
la Mauritanie
all the way
au
to
centre,
Sudan, and we are the
et
center,
appartient donc à la fois
at the heart
aux
of
deux
that,
parties
of that
occidentales
area. And
et
so
orientales de
we
cette
are
zone
both part of the
qui fait
Eastern
face
and Western
depuis un
Africa.
certain temps
And in
menaces
that
terroristes,
area, there are many
aux menaces
terrorist
des organisations
threats,
criminelles,
threats
du
from
trafic de drogue, des armes,
terrorist
des
organizations.
êtres
There's
humains,
also
etc.
drug trafficking,
zone
and also human
est aussi
trafficking.
le théâtre de
This area
rébellions
where we
armées,
live has been marked
comme
by
l'atteste
armed
la
rebellions,
situation au Mali.
as we can see in
Soudan.
Mali, in the
Et à
Sudan,
une certaine époque,
and at
au
a
Niger
time
et au Tchad.
in Niger and Chad too.
Toutes ces menaces,
All these threats,
il faut le dire,
we
ont
must
été
say,
amplifiées
have been amplified
par la crise libyenne,
by the Libyan
Parce que c'est passé en
crisis,
Libye.
by what happened in Libya,
déclenchée
which was
à
triggered
partir de 2011.
after 2011.
Cette crise libyenne
This Libyan crisis
a créé un chaos
created
indescriptible
chaos, indescribable
dans le pays,
chaos in that
avec la
country,
dissolution de l'État
with the
central,
dissolution of
avec
the
le
central
pillage
government
des dépôts
and
d'armes,
the pillaging of
avec la confiscation du pays
weapons,
par des
arms
milices
depot,
armées rivales,
and the
avec
birth of
l'existence
rival
aujourd'hui de deux
militias.
gouvernements,
And we have now
l'un à
two
Tobruk
governments in Libya,
l'autre à
one in
Tripoli,
Tobruk and the other one in
avec la
Tripoli.
transformation de certaines parties du
And
territoire
some parts of the
en
country
sanctuaires
are now sanctuaries for terrorists,
notamment
especially
pour l'État islamique.
for the so-called
Daesh,
Islamic
dont, vous entendez
state
parler.
Daesh, of which you
La
have heard.
situation
The situation
dans laquelle se trouve la
in
Libye
which Libya is now
prouve,
shows,
s'il en est besoin,
if necessary, if it
que
was
l'anarchie-
needed, that anarchy,
l'anarchie est le pire des
anarchy
régimes politiques.
is the worst of all political systems.
Si on nous avait écouté,
If we had been listened to,
une telle situation
such a situation
ne serait pas arrivée.
would not have
En
occurred,
effet,
because
je me rappelle
I remember
avoir dit
that I said
à l'occasion du sommet du G8
when during the
tenu
G8
en
summit,
2011 à
which
Deauville en France,
took place in Deauville in
Il
France
faut
in
éviter
2011, I
que
said
le
that
changement
you have to
qui est
avoid
recherché en Libye
that the change
soit pire
searched
le maintien
for
du
in
statu
Libya should not be worse
Et
than the
le
status
terme
quo.
exact que j'avais
And
utilisé,
the exact words I used
pour éviter
was,
que la
we have
solution
to
soit
avoid
pire que le mal.
a solution that
Si
would
le
be
mal, c'est
worse
Kadhafi,
than
mais
the
il faut
evil.
éviter
Maybe
la
evil
solution
was
possible
Gaddafi,
après Kadhafi
but the
soit
solution
pire
after
que le
Gaddafi,
mal.
post-Gaddafi, must not be worse.
J'avais
And in fact, this
insisté
is
sur
what
les
happened.
risques
I had
de
mentioned
somalisation,
the risk of transformation
de
of
dissolution
Libya
l'État
to
libyen.
a situation like in
Ainsi
Somalia,
que
the
sur celui de
dissolution
voir
of
le
the
pouvoir
state,
tomber
and the
entre les
risk
mains
to
des
see that
terroristes.
terrorists would take over
Après la chute
a large swath
de
of the
Kadhafi,
territory. After the fall of
J'avais
Gaddafi,
vainement insisté
I in
sur
vain
la nécessité
tried to
d'un
warn
service après-vente qui n'a pas eu
people
lieu,
to
malheureusement.
organize
Par
a
ailleurs,
system that would try
les
to
événements
prevent
de Libye
this balkanization of Libya.
illustre bien le
The events
déficit
in Libya
démocratique
show very
au
clearly
niveau
the lack
de
of
la gouvernance
democratic
mondiale.
values
Moi, je suis
in
voisin de Libye,
world governance. I'm a neighbor of
mais
Libya,
j'ai pas été consulté
but I was not consulted
quand
when
il a été décidé
it was
d'intervenir en Libye.
decided to intervene
Mais aujourd'hui,
in Libya. But today,
nous en payons
we are paying
les conséquences.
the
C'est
price.
nous qui en payons
We are paying
les conséquences.
the price for
Or
this
la décision
intervention.
a été prise
Well,
sans
the
nous.
decision was
il y
taken
a un problème.
without us, and there's a
déficit
problem. There's a
au niveau
deficit
de
of
la
of
gouvernance
democracy
mondiale, le
on
déficit
the
démocratique
world level.
au niveau de la gouvernance mondiale. Pour sortir du chaos,
In order to get out of the
il faut
chaos,
maintenant
it is now
nous écouter.
necessary to
Il faut
listen to
écouter les
us.
Africains.
You have to listen to
Pour
Africans.
sortir du chaos,
In order to
le Niger
evolve,
préconise
Niger
une réconciliation
promotes
des Libyens
reconciliation
modérés,
of the moderate
la
Libyans,
restauration de l'État
the restoration of the
qui sera
state,
soutenue
which
ensuite
would then
par
be
une force
supported
internationale
by an international
capable
armed force
de
capable
neutraliser.
of neutralizing terrorists.
De manière générale,
Generally speaking,
la situation dans la
the
bande
situation
sahélo-saharienne
of the Sahel and Sahara
révèle
area
cruellement
shows
la faiblesse des
the
États.
weakness of the
Qui ont
states
des
in this
difficultés
part of
à
the
assurer
world.
la sécurité.
They cannot
leurs
ensure
frontières.
the security
Et celle
and control
de
of
leurs
their
citoyens.
borders, and they cannot
Plus de
ensure
50 ans
security for their
après l'indépendance.
population more than 50 years
Elle montre
after
les
independence. The situation shows
peuvent
the
exister
conflicts that can
entre
exist
sécurité et développement,
between security and development,
entre sécurité
between
et liberté, plutôt.
security
Entre
and
sécurité et
liberty,
liberté.
security and liberty,
Entre sécurité
between
et
security
souveraineté.
and
Parce
sovereignty,
que nous avons des
because
forces étrangères
there are
présentes sur
foreign
notre territoire.
country, foreign actors
que nous
involved
n'arrivons
on
pas
our territories
à
because
faire
we
face à
cannot
nous-mêmes
by ourselves control
auxquels nos pays sont exposés.
our
Il y a un
borders.
conflit là,
There is a big problem and a conflict between
et
security
souveraineté.
and
La même façon
sovereignty,
qui peut arriver, qui est ce conflit entre,
just like there are
sécurité et
conflicts
liberté.
between
Vous l'avez connu ici aux
security
États-Unis,
and liberty. You
au
had
lendemain
this
du
problem
11
at the end
septembre.
of
Les libertés ont été
September
limitées
11th.
pour faire face
Liberties were curtailed in order to fight terrorism. And the same thing is happening in Sahel now when we are confronted with similar terrorism.
qu'avec l'avènement du terrorisme,
Also, with the
disparaît la
occurrence
frontière
of
entre
terrorism,
défense et sécurité.
there is no border
Entre
anymore
sécurité
between
extérieure
defense and security,
sécurité
or
intérieure.
between external and internal
Le terrorisme
security.
n'a pas de frontières.
Terrorism has no borders.
Ainsi,
And
les actions des
if
terroristes
the actions
d'Al-Qaïda,
of the terrorists from
pour le
Al-Qaïda
Maghreb islamique,
for the
AQMI,
Islamic Maghreb, AQMI,
ainsi que celles des
as
terroristes
well as
qui
those
agissent depuis la
for
Libye,
the terrorists acting from
affectent
Libya,
plus ou moins
affect
tous les pays de la région.
more or less all
Boko Haram.
countries of the area. Boko
Organisation
Haram,
terroriste
a terrorist organization
Nigeria.
born in Nigeria
au début des années
at the
2000
beginning of the
s'attaque
2000s,
non seulement à ce
is
pays,
attacking not
mais
only
aussi au Cameroun,
targets in Nigeria, but
Niger
also in
et au
Cameroun,
Tchad.
Niger, and Chad.
Ces 4 pays,
These 4
plus
countries,
le Bénin,
as well as Benin,
la combattent
are fighting
dans le cadre
that group
d'une force mixte
within a
multinationale.
multinational mixed
succès
armed force.
Enregistrée
We have
par
had
ces pays,
material
particulier par les troupes
successes,
tchadiennes et
especially
nigériennes,
the troops from
qui
Chad
ont
and Niger,
récemment
which recently
libéré plusieurs villes du
liberated
Nigeria,
a number of cities and
s'explique
towns
non
in
seulement
Nigeria,
par
can be
la
explained
mutualisation de leurs moyens de
not only
renseignement,
by the fact
de
that
leur
they are
capacité
coordinating
opérationnelle,
now their information
mais aussi
systems
et
and
surtout
operational forces, but
par une
also, and maybe
adhésion
even more
des
important,
populations
by the fact
derrière
that
le
they are
gouvernement
supported by the
et les forces
population.
de
The
défense et de
population
sécurité.
support the armies and the government
un
of
élément
our
extrêmement
countries.
important
This is
qui
extremely
prouve
important, and
que
it
les
shows
populations
that
de
the
nos pays
population of
n'acceptent
our
pas le
country
n'acceptent pas
reject
l'extrémisme.
terrorism,
Les
reject
populations de nos
extremism.
pays
The
ne
population
considèrent pas
of
Boko
our
Haram
countries do
comme
not
une
consider
organisation
Boko
islamique,
Haram
comme une
like as
organisation
an
musulmane.
Islamic or
Et c'est
Muslim
pour cela
organization.
que
And this is
les
why
populations
the population
sont avec les
of
gouvernements
our countries
pour mener le combat
support
contre
the governments
ces terroristes.
to fight terrorists.
C'est dire que
This is to say
la Trinité,
that
c'est
the
que
Trinity,
Clausewitz, je ne sais pas si la prononciation est bonne en allemand, Clausewitz, c'est comme ça qu'on dit.
as we say in German, or Clausewitz, von Clausewitz, the German
Après
general,
cette théorie de la Trinité,
developed this theory of
peuple,
Trinity,
gouvernement, armée, donc la Trinité,
people, government, and
qui a
army.
toujours été recherchée
This
par le passé,
Trinity was always
dans les guerres
aimed at
dites
in the past
industrielles,
during the
fonctionne à
industrial
merveille
era, but it
dans
works
les guerres
very
asymétriques
well in
menées au sein des
asymmetrical
populations,
wars led
contre,
inside the
par les
populations
terroristes.
by terrorists.
Ceux-ci, prétendent mener le jihad
They pretend, they
nom
claim
d'Allah,
to be doing jihad in the name
au
of
nom de
Allah,
l'islam.
in the name of Islam.
Or, l'islam,
But Islam,
par définition,
by definition,
est une religion de
is
paix,
a religion of
de
peace,
tolérance,
tolerance,
de juste milieu.
and of
L'islam prescrit
just
aux musulmans de
justice.
rechercher le
Islam
savoir,
taught
Boko Haram
Muslims
empêche
to look for
les musulmans de
knowledge,
chercher le
while
savoir.
Boko
Parce que
Haram
Boko Haram,
prevents Muslims from trying to
ça veut
learn. Boko
Ça
Haram,
veut
what
dire
it
aller
means,
à l'école
it's
occidentale, à
the
l'école
fact
des
that
Blancs,
going to the Western
c'est un péché.
schools, like the
Alors que
white people's
l'islam
school,
prêche,
is a sin,
prescrit
while
le
Islam
savoir.
prescribes
À
the
l'époque
search
du
for
prophète, le
knowledge. At
prophète
the time
disait,
of the Prophet
et Dieu
was
sait que
saying,
la Chine était loin à
and
l'époque du
God
prophète.
knows that
Il y avait
China
pas
was
d'avion,
far.
il y avait pas de
There
chemin
were
de
no
fer,
cars,
il y avait pas de voiture.
there were no
Mais le prophète
planes
disait,
or
incitez les musulmans
railroads to go
à
to
aller
China.
chercher
But
le
the
savoir
Prophet
jusqu'en
was
Chine.
telling the Muslims, the
Pour
believers, to go all the way to
l'importance du
China to
savoir.
look for knowledge,
Et il
to show how
recommandait
important it was to
aux
learn.
musulmans
And he was telling
d'apprendre
Muslims to
du
learn
berceau à la tombe.
from the cradle to grave.
Les terroristes de
The
Boko Haram,
terrorists from Boko Haram,
comme tous les autres
as well
terroristes,
as other
ne sont pas
terrorists,
musulmans. Je
are
l'ai
not
dit, je le
Muslims.
répète encore.
I said it
C'est
and
pas
I will
des
say
musulmans.
it again. They are not
Au
Muslims.
contraire,
Quite the contrary.
ils sont les
They
pires
are
ennemis de
the
l'islam.
worst enemies of Islam.
Parce que proclamer
Because to
que
claim
fréquenter l'école
that
est un péché,
going to school is a sin,
enlever et violer des femmes,
rape women,
comme le prouve le cas des
as
jeunes filles enlevées l'année
what
dernière
happened
à
last
Chibok,
year
au Nigeria.
in
Tout
Chibok,
le monde se rappelle de
in
ça.
Nigeria, everybody remembers that.
Commettre le parricide. Parce que il y
Kill
a quelques semaines,
innocents, because a few
un
weeks
Nigérien,
ago,
un jeune Nigérien
a young man
était
from
engagé
Nigeria
dans les rangs de Boko Haram,
who was
était
part
revenu du Nigeria,
of was fighting with Boko Haram,
égorgé,
has
je vous dis bien, égorgé son père.
killed his father,
L'islam n'autorise pas ça.
and that's not allowed by Islam.
Donc, enlever,
So,
violer des femmes,
uh,
et commettre le
rape
parricide,
women, kill your
égorger
father,
des personnes innocentes,
kill innocent people,
boire du sang humain.
or
In
drink
Islam.
human blood in the
N'est-ce
name of
pas
Islam.
La
It's not
façon la plus efficace
the most
de
efficient way
combattre l'islam.
to fight
L'islam, comme on le
Islam.
sait,
As we know,
prescrit
Islam
la
prescribes
chasteté.
chastity,
le respect dû aux parents,
respect for
qu'il est dit,
parents, because it
après
is said
la reconnaissance
that
du Dieu unique,
after
le deuxième
recognizing
devoir du musulman,
a single
c'est
God, the second
d'obéir
duty of
à ses
a
parents,
Muslim
de
is to
respecter
obey his or her parents.
l'islam
Islam
proclame que tuer,
asserts that
seule.
killing even one person
c'est tuer toute l'humanité.
is
Il y a un verset
killing
du Coran qui le dit.
mankind.
Tuer un
There's
seul
a
homme,
verse of the Quran
c'est
which
tuer
says
tous
that
les hommes.
if you kill one
C'est
man,
écrit
you
noir
kill
et
all
blanc
men.
dans le
It is
Coran.
written black and white in the
Les
Quran.
populations de nos pays
The
connaissent
population
tout cela.
of our countries know
C'est pour
that.
cette raison
This is why
qu'elles soutiennent
they
la force mixte
support
multinationale
the mixed
dans
multinational
la lutte
armed
contre
force
Boko Haram.
in a fight against
Du
Boko
reste,
Haram.
Pour citer un exemple,
And to quote an
le
example,
17 février dernier,
on February
le
17th,
peuple nigérien
the
était
people
sorti
of
massivement
Niger
pour dire non au terrorisme
demonstrated in
d'une
mass
seule voix
to
et pour
fight,
soutenir
to condemn
les
terrorism
forces de défense et de
and
sécurité
to support
du Niger
the
en
Niger
lutte contre
army
Boko Haram.
fighting Boko
Boko
Haram.
Haram
Boko
n'a pas
Haram
d'avenir.
has no future.
Boko Haram
Boko
sera vaincu.
Haram will be defeated, inshallah.
La force Merci. Merci.
Thank you.
La force mixte
The
multinationale
multinational force,
qui enregistre de plus en plus de
which
succès
is
dans la lutte contre
becoming
cette
more and more
organisation
successful
criminelle,
against this criminal
montre
organization,
que c'est bien
shows
par plus de
that
coopération
it is through
niveau
more
international
cooperation, increased
viendra à
international
bout du
cooperation
terrorisme.
that will help us defeat
Elle pourrait être
terrorism.
le modèle
It could be the
qui
model
permettrait aux pays
that
africains
would enable
de faire
African
face
countries
par eux-mêmes
to confront
aux menaces
the
auxquelles est
threats
exposé le continent.
to which the continent is
L'Union
exposed.
africaine
The African Union
peut s'en inspirer
can
pour la mise en
inspire,
œuvre de la force
get
africaine en
inspiration
attente,
for the creation
celle
of
de
a
la capacité
multinational
africaine de réponse
armed
immédiate
force
aux
at the
crises.
continental level to intervene
réponse
in case of crisis.
au terrorisme
But the response
ne doit
to
pas
terrorism
être que sécuritaire.
cannot be only based on
Pour
security
l'éradiquer à
issues.
long
In order
terme,
to eradicate terrorism
il faut
in a
faire
long
disparaître
run, you
le
have
terreau qui
to
favorise son
destroy
développement.
the ground in which it
Ce
is
terreau,
bred, and
c'est
this
la pauvreté.
ground is poverty.
Au Niger,
In Niger,
nous sommes conscients
we are aware
de la liaison
of
étroite
the link,
qui
the
existe
close
entre
link
sécurité
that
et
exists
développement.
between security and
En
development.
effet, le programme
The
que
program
je mets en œuvre
that I
depuis 4 ans
have been implementing for the
considère
last
qu'il y
4
a
years
un lien
is based
indissoluble
on the fact that there
entre
is
démocratie,
a
sécurité et
link
développement.
between democracy, security,
alliance
and
doit
development.
exister
There must be an
entre la
alliance
sécurité,
between
la démocratie
security,
et le pain.
democracy, and
Le
bread.
pain, c'est le développement.
Bread is a symbol for
Sans cette
development.
alliance,
Without this
Au
alliance,
niveau de ces 3 termes,
nothing
C'est
will
le
be
triptyque,
accomplished.
sur la base duquel je
This
travaille.
is the
Sans
principle
démocratie,
I used to
Pas
guide
de
my
bonne
work.
gouvernance,
Improve
Et sans
democracy,
bonne gouvernance,
improve governance.
pas de développement.
Otherwise, there will be no
Il est
development.
vrai,
It is true.
il est vrai que
It is true
sur la
that
base des succès
on
économiques
the
de certains
basis
pays
of
de
the
l'Asie
economic
du Sud-Est,
successes of some countries in
notamment
Southeast
la
Asia,
réussite,
especially
la belle réussite de
the
Singapour
success of Singapore, for
sous la
instance,
direction de
under the direction
Lee Kuan Yew,
of Lee Kuan Yew,
décédé récemment,
who died just a few days
et dont
ago.
je salue
And
la mémoire.
I salute his memory.
Donc sous la direction de Lee
Because
Kuan Yew
under
et ses
his
successeurs,
direction and that of his
Certains ont pensé
successors, some people
que la
thought
démocratie
that
est incompatible
democracy is
avec le développement.
not compatible
et que c'est
with
plutôt
development, and
l'autoritarisme
that
qui serait
authoritarianism
compatible avec la
is
croissance
more
économique.
appropriate
Je
to
ne suis pas de
promote
cet avis.
economic growth. I do not
Les
share
réussites
that view.
économiques des
The
régimes
success
autoritaires,
of authoritarian
une exception.
states are an exception.
les réussites
The
économiques
economic
sous des
success
régimes démocratiques
under democratic regimes
sont la règle.
are the rule.
Il est bien sûr
It is, of
évident
course, obvious
que des États
that
faibles,
weak
même
states,
démocratiques,
even democratic,
ne peuvent rien apporter de
cannot
bon.
have
à leur
success concerning
Au Niger,
economic development. But we have to
Le programme de
strengthen
développement durable
the
que nous
state
mettons en
institution.
œuvre
The program of
est bâti sur
sustainable
l'hypothèse d'un taux de
development we are
croissance
creating is
annuel
based on a
de
hypothesis
7%.
of a 7%
Le taux annuel
annual
moyen
growth rate.
de
The
croissance
average
réalisé depuis
growth
4 ans,
rates in the last
entre
4
2011 et
years
2014, est
between
d'environ
2011 and
Nous sommes très
2014 is
des objectifs
6%.
positifs.
So not quite 7%, but
Nous sommes
pretty close.
efforcés
We are
à faire en sorte que
trying
cette
to do
croissance
our best so that this growth
soit inclusive,
be inclusive.
C'est-à-dire qu'elle profite
What I mean
à
is that it
l'ensemble
should benefit to
En
the
particulier,
entire population
qu'elle
of
profite aux
Niger,
couches
especially
les plus défavorisées
the
de
poorest
notre société.
segments of the
C'est pour
population.
cette raison
And this is why
que le gouvernement
the government
met l'accent
is
sur la lutte
focusing
contre les inégalités,
a
à
fight,
travers
is focused on
notamment
a fight against
la
inequality,
promotion d'une
especially
classe moyenne.
through the development of a
Comme
middle
on le
class.
sait,
As everybody
la
knows,
classe moyenne
the middle class
a non seulement un intérêt économique,
has not only an
en ce que
economic interest
son existence
in-
soutient la croissance économique,
in its
mais aussi un
in
intérêt
order to
politique,
produce,
car dans
but
tous
also
les
a
pays,
political interest,
elle
because
constitue un
in
facteur
all
de stabilité.
countries it is a factor
de
of
cohésion
stability
sociale.
and social cohesion.
L'histoire
The
économique
economic history
des 30
of
glorieuses
what we call in France
Celle du
the
Fordisme.
30 glorious
et
days.
du reste là.
It's an example,
prouver.
can prove it.
En Afrique,
In Africa,
d'après une étude de la Banque mondiale,
based on a study from the
de la
World
Banque
Bank
africaine de développement,
and the
appartiennent
African
à la
Development
classe
Bank,
moyenne
the
tous ceux
role
qui ont
of
un
the
revenu
middle class
journalier
is
situé
important, and
entre
middle
2
class is defined
et $20
a-
des États-Unis d'Amérique.
defined as a daily
Environ
income
30%
between $2 and
d'Africains
$20.
Sont dans cette
About
tranche de revenus.
30% of all Africans
Des études
are
effectuées au
middle
Niger
class based on this
Détiennent
criteria of the
des
African
critères
Development Bank. We have
pour
different
définir,
criteria
la classe
in
moyenne.
Niger to define
Elles
middle
montrent
class.
que environ 45%
Here we show that
des
about
Nigériens
45% of the population
appartiennent à
of
cette
Niger belong
Mais
to
on
the
n'applique
middle
pas les
class.
critères de la BAD,
But we
les
don't
critères
use
propres au Niger.
the African Development
Alors
Bank
que
criteria. We have
48%
our own criteria.
Nigériens
And 48%
dessous
of the
du seuil de
people in
pauvreté.
Niger are under
Notre
the
ambition
threshold of poverty.
était de
Our
réduire
ambition was to
le taux
reduce
de pauvreté
the poverty
à
rate
31% en 2015.
down to 31% in 2015. Unfortunately,
Nous n'y arriverons pas
we will not be able to do it,
à cette échéance,
at least now.
mais nous avons décidé
But we
d'accélérer
decided
le pas.
that we would speed up the
En
process.
particulier,
In
nous
particular,
travaillons à la création
we are
des conditions
trying to
de la
create
transition
conditions
démographique
for a demographic
à travers la
change
réduction de la
through the
mortalité
reduction
infantile
of
qui entraînera, comme ailleurs,
child death,
celle
which
de la natalité.
in Niger and
Cela
other
nous
places
permettra
is
sans doute
dismal.
de
This
bénéficier
should enable us
du dividende
to
démographique.
get to benefit from what we call the demographic dividend.
Le pays
Right now, we
qui a
have
le taux de
the
fécondité le
country
plus élevé du monde,
with the highest
avec
fertility rate in the
plus de
world,
7 enfants par femme.
with more than 7 children
Le taux
per,
annuel moyen
per woman.
de
The
croissance de la population
rate,
est quant à lui
annual rate
d'environ 4%.
of the population is
Avec un tel
4%.
taux,
With such a rate,
la
the
population
population
du Niger
of Niger
doublera tous
will
les 18 ans.
double every 18
Vous
years.
voyez le défi
You see
auquel
the
nous sommes
challenge that we
confrontés,
have to
est énorme.
confront. It is
mais nous
enormous,
sommes déterminés.
but we are
à le surmonter.
determined to overcome it.
D'ailleurs,
In fact,
convaincus que le meilleur
when we are
préservatif
convinced that the best
et le développement économique et social
way to
Nous mettons
ensure
en œuvre le programme de
peace and
renaissance
stability is
avec
to
un accent
promote
particulier
economic
sur le
development.
développement des
And our
infrastructures,
Renaissance program is
de
focused on the
l'agriculture,
development of infrastructure,
l'initiative
of
3N.
agriculture, with the
Les
3N
Nigériens nourrissent les Nigériens.
initiative.
La
Nigerians
promotion de
nourish
l'éducation universelle
Nigerians.
obligatoire et
We are
gratuite
promoting free
jusqu'à
and
l'âge de 16
universal
ans,
schooling
en
for all
insistant sur la
children until
scolarisation
the
des
age of
jeunes filles,
16, including
avec un accent
girls.
particulier aussi
And
sur
also,
la formation professionnelle.
we are pushing for
Le
technical
programme de
and
Renaissance
professional vocational
met
schools.
aussi l'accent
The Renaissance
sur l'accès
program
aux soins de santé,
is also
à l'eau potable,
focused
à
on the
l'assainissement,
development
aux
of
logements
health,
sociaux et aux emplois,
using
pour les jeunes.
having more drinking water
Il est
available,
évident
creating
le
low-cost
développement de tous ces
housing
secteurs
and creating jobs
aura
for
des
young
effets
people. It is
positifs sur la
clear
démographie
that the
inversement.
effect of this
La mise en
development
œuvre
will help reduce the
programme
demographic explosion.
est un franc succès.
We have had
Ainsi,
a great success so
Des
far.
routes ont été construites
We have built
permettant
roads
le
enabling
désenclavement intérieur et extérieur du pays,
some isolated
Une voie de
area
chemin de fer
of the
est en
country
cours de
to be now
réalisation
connected for the first time
afin de
to
relier
the
le
main
pays aux
urban
principaux
centers.
ports
We have
de la sous-région,
developed the
dans le
infrastructure
cadre
for
de
transportation
la grande
through
boucle
roads,
ferroviaire
railroads,
Lomé, Cotonou,
and also
Ouagadougou, Abidjan,
the,
peut-être qu'il y en a qui connaissent pas le nom
the
de celui,
boats
ça les incitera
and
à
ports
aller sur
on
la carte de
Niger.
l'Afrique,
But there are other
où
who are
se
connected
situe
from
Lomé,
Niamey
où se
to
situe
Lomé.
Cotonou,
You may
Niamey,
not know where
Ouagadougou,
these cities are, but you look
Un
at a
barrage
map of Africa
hydroélectrique
and you will see where they
est
are.
en cours de
And there
réalisation
is
sur le
a
fleuve Niger.
hydroelectrical
Une
dam
centrale
that
thermique
is being
de
built
grande
on the
puissance
Niger River.
permettra au
And
pays
we have also also energy stations that are developed in order to use our resources. We have like coal. I know it is not good for the ecology, but we need to use our mineral resources for development. We have fiber optic networks being built, and some are already operational, and that would enable us to overcome the digital divide in the country. A big problem we have is droughts in Niger. We now are successful because even where there are droughts, we have no, the hunger increases, but there's no famine anymore. We've been able to reduce poverty in rural areas, especially among women. And this is extremely important because in Niger, poverty is mostly rural. 3 poor people out of 4 live in rural areas. Poverty in Niger is also women. 3 out of 5 poor people are women. This is why we stress this 3N initiative in order to help rural areas and women so as to give women more power to survive on their own. Through this initiative, 3N, we have reached the first objective of the Millennium for the Development, which concerns the reduction by half of the number of people suffering from malnutrition and hunger. Based on UNICEF studies, reaching the Millennium Development 4, but reduction of child mortality caused by malnutrition is something that we can reach. It's a goal we can reach pretty soon. And we have other objectives like fighting AIDS. We have the African country which has the lowest rate of prevalence of AIDS, 0.4% about. Thanks to the 3N initiative, the middle class will grow even more in rural areas. The development of the Renaissance program has enabled us to improve the educational level. I do not want to give you too many numbers. The numbers, I will not give you numbers here, but the program has also increased access to health care. The health system has been improved. We have been recruiting many health workers also. And this program has also helped access to water and creating thousands of jobs for young people. Ladies and gentlemen, even though we are handicapped by the climate, but Niger has many assets for its development. Democratic institution, rule of law that we are creating. We are creating a legal framework to protect foreign investors. Peace and security in spite of being in a tormented area, in spite of challenges, but security in the neighboring countries. We have a young population, and if it is trained and educated, will be capable of innovation and creativity. We have natural resources underground: uranium, coal, oil, gas, gold, phosphate, tin, and so on. And we have decided that these resources will not be a malediction for us, as it is the case in many oil-producing countries, where the money from oil becomes bad for the country because they don't benefit the entire country, they just benefit a small minority. In our country, we want the entire population to benefit from the exploitation of natural resources. We do everything to develop balanced partnerships with foreign investors in order to, for instance, to have a transparent management through the initiative of transference in mining industries. For instance, recently we have had tough negotiating with Areva regarding the mining of uranium, and we were able to reach a balanced agreement with Areva. And this is what we are doing now regarding the exploitation of our oil and other mining resources. In addition,
Par ailleurs, nous mettons tout en
We
œuvre
are doing everything we
pour
can
mobiliser les ressources
to
internes
mobilize internal resources
améliorer
and improve
l'efficacité
the
de la
efficiency
dépense publique.
of public spending.
Mais
However,
il y a un mais.
there is a but,
Mais
however.
tous nos efforts
All our efforts
resteront vains
will be in vain,
si nous
unless
continuons
something changes,
à agir
because we must not
de manière
continue
isolée
acting in
par rapport
isolation
au reste des pays africains.
without ties
Par rapport
to
au
what
reste
other
du continent.
African
Je dis
countries
ça
do.
surtout pour les Africains.
And I said that
Nous sommes
mostly
notre
for the Africans who are
C'est
present
important.
in this room. It
De
is
ne pas
important
Rester isolés.
not to
Chacun
work in isolation,
derrière sa
each
frontière.
one
Chacun
within their own
derrière son petit
borders,
drapeau.
behind
Il est
each
important
their flag. It is important
Que nous
that
tirions
we
les leçons de l'histoire.
draw the
Nous ne
lessons
devons
of
pas oublier
history.
les leçons.
We must not forget
Nous ne devons pas oublier que
that
une de nos faiblesses,
one of our weaknesses
c'est notre division.
is our
La
division,
de l'Afrique.
the division of Africa.
Et n'oublions pas Darwin.
And let's not forget what Darwin said.
Les plus faibles
The weakest
sont toujours la proie.
are always the prey of the strong. Everybody knows that.
Notre survie
Our
dépend donc
survival
de
depends
notre capacité à
on
nous unir.
our capacity to unite.
En effet, nous sommes
We
engagés dans
are,
une sévère compétition.
Part of a
plan
world
international.
when there is severe competition
Après
on
la
the international level.
Première mondialisation,
After the first
dominée par les
globalization,
échanges de biens
which
et de
was
services,
dominated by exchange of
et la
goods and
deuxième
services, and the
mondialisation,
second wave
dominée par
of
le capital
globalization,
industriel,
which was dominated by
sommes
industrial capital,
actuellement à
we are
l'heure
now at the
de la
time
troisième
of the third
mondialisation,
globalization movement,
caractérisée
which is
par la
characterized
domination
by the
du capital financier.
domination of financial
l'heure
capital
de la globalisation.
at the time of
Il y a
globalization.
eu,
There,
tout au long de
has
ces
been,
différentes configurations,
in
de la
all this,
mondialisation,
at all these,
des
all these
transferts de
those
richesses
periods, there were transfers of
du
wealth
sud vers le nord,
from south to north
à travers l'échange inégal,
through unequal
exemple,
agreements. For
une
instance,
certaine quantité
a certain
de produits
quantity
primaires
of primary
qui
products
permettent d'acheter
which
dans une année donnée
enable us to
une
buy
certaine quantité
a
de
certain
produits
quantity
manufacturés
of finished product in a
ne
given
peut
year
plus permettre d'acheter
cannot
ces mêmes quantités
allow
l'année
us
suivante.
anymore
Donc,
to buy the same quantity the
les
following
termes
year.
d'échange se
So the terms of
détériorent
exchange
au dépens
have been
des produits
deteriorating
primaires.
to the
Donc,
expense
à
of
travers
producers
l'échange
of primary products
À travers
and
le
unfinished
capital
products,
industriel avec
raw
un
materials.
transfert parfois
The
abusif de
transfer, abusive transfer of
aussi qu'à
dividends
travers
also has been
le capital financier de l'État.
unfavorable to
Par
us.
exemple,
For
dans
instance,
les années 70,
during the
certains s'en souviennent
1970s,
certainement,
maybe some of you
les pays du
remember,
Sud ont été très
the
fortement
countries from
endettés.
the south
Et
had
c'était endettés à
high
des
level
taux
of
variables.
debt at variable
À un moment
rates.
où
There was a
le taux
time
d'intérêt était très
when
bas.
the interest
Mais
rates
vers la
were
fin
very
des années
low. But
70,
at the end of the
certains
70s,
pays,
certain
pour lutter
countries,
contre l'inflation,
in order to
avaient
fight
augmenté les taux d'intérêt.
inflation, had increased
Et
interest
comme on
rates.
a
And
contracté les dettes à
as a
des taux variables,
result, when we
on les a contractés à un
contracted
moment où
debts
les taux étaient très
at a
faibles,
low
on
interest
a dû les
rate,
rembourser
but we
à
had
un
to
moment où les
reimburse
taux d'intérêt
our
étaient
debts
devenus
at a
très
time
élevés.
where interest rates were
Vous
very
voyez, là, il y
high.
a eu un transfert
That was
à
there was a
travers,
transfer
le capital financier
through financial
à travers les taux
financial
d'intérêt
capital
très élevés.
through
Le
the
Sud,
fluctuations of
À
interest
quelques
rates.
rares exceptions,
With a few exceptions, the South,
malheureusement,
unfortunately, is
pendant que
getting
le Nord
poorer,
s'enrichit.
while the North is getting
Mais la
richer.
pauvreté du Sud
But the poverty of the South
réduit la consommation mondiale
reduces the world
et a des
consumption
conséquences négatives.
and has negative
sur la
consumption
croissance même du
consequences on the growth of the North.
Et c'est pour cela que je vais citer
And
un
this is
président
why
américain.
I will quote an American president,
C'est le président Truman,
President Truman,
en 1949.
in
Voilà ce qu'il dit.
1949. This is what he said.
Je le cite.
I'm quoting.
Il nous faut lancer
We need to
un nouveau programme
launch a new
qui
program
soit audacieux
that will be audacious
et qui mette les
and
avantages
which
de
has
notre
to
avance technologique
help us
et de notre progrès
use
industriel
the advantages of our
service
industrial
de
programs and
l'amélioration
technology to the
et de
service
la croissance
of
des régions
improvement
sous-développées.
of underdeveloped areas.
Leur pauvreté,
Their poverty
constitue un
is
handicap,
a handicap,
tant pour eux
both for them
que pour les régions
and
les plus prospères.
for the most prosperous
Les
regions.
États-Unis
The United States
occupent parmi les nations une place
have
prééminente
a preeminent
quant au
position
développement
among
des techniques
nations
industrielles et
in
scientifiques.
regarding scientific and
L'expérience
technological
montre
solutions. Experience shows
Notre commerce
that our trade
avec les autres pays
with other countries
s'accroît
increases
au fur et à mesure de leur progrès
as
industriel.
the other countries become more developed industrially and economically. An increase of their production beyond our borders is a key to prosperity here too, and key to peace. So President Truman
Les questions de croissance économique aux
connects
États-Unis
economic
aux
growth
questions
in
de
the
développement du
US
Sud.
to
pays du
the
Sud,
economic
les pays du
development
Sud
of
sont
the country of
développés,
the South. The more
cela
the countries of the
soutiendra la
South will
croissance
be
des
economically developed, the more the growth in the
C'était
United
une
States
belle
will be
vision
developed. It was a beautiful vision
que
that
celle du président Truman
President Truman
et la vision du président
expressed,
Truman
and his vision
est d'autant plus pertinente
is all the more pertinent
que le
and
monde
relevant
était
that the
déjà
world
à l'époque
was already at the time
dans une crise d'encombrement, c'est ce que certains spécialistes disaient,
in a crisis
une
of
crise d'encombrement,
excess
c'est-à-dire
production
dans un moment où il n'y
at a
avait
time
déjà plus
when
de nouvelles terres à conquérir.
we could not
Un moment où la
find
résilience
new
des
land,
économies développées
and we didn't know how
dépend
to
de
sell
la
some
conquête de
products.
nouveaux marchés, de nouveaux
And
territoires.
it was not the time
Mais
anymore to conquer new
développement.
territories. We had
Des
to
territoires déjà
develop
conquis.
the
Développement
already existing
marchés déjà
countries,
Il
existing
est
markets.
dommage qu'une aussi
The,
excellente vision
This
n'ait jamais été
vision,
mise en œuvre.
unfortunately, was
La
never
volonté de
implemented.
domination
The
l'ayant
will
emporté
to dominate
sur les impératifs de la
prevailed
solidarité
above,
au
beyond
fond,
the
l'équilibre
imperative of
dans les
solidarity
relations entre pays
and the balance
garantit mieux
in
la
the
paix.
relationship between
domination.
countries, because fair
Malheureusement,
balance in relations between countries
chacun s'est
is better for
organisé
peace
pour,
than attempt at
défendre ses
domination.
intérêts,
But
sans
everybody
concession.
tried to defend their own interests.
Face aux États-Unis,
And against the United States,
avec leur avance technologique
with their
industrielle et une
technology
population de
and
312 millions
industry and a population of
Face à l'Union
312 million
avec ses
people,
28 pays,
and also the
et ses
28
500 millions
countries
d'habitants.
of the
Face à la
European
Chine,
Union, and it's 500
ses
million people,
1 milliard
against
357
China
millions
and
d'habitants.
its
Face à
1.3
l'Inde,
billion
ses
inhabitants,
1 milliard
and India
252
and its
millions d'habitants. Face à
1.25
tous
billion
ces grands,
people,
à tous
against
ces
those
mastodontes,
mastodons, those
que peut
huge
faire le Niger
economic
Niger
powerhouse. What can Niger
avec,
do in itself, by
ses
itself,
18 millions d'habitants?
with its 18 million
C'est pour
people?
cela que je lance
This
cet
is
appel à l'unité.
Why I am calling for
L'Union
unity,
africaine.
unity of
Pour
Africa,
peser,
to
il faut être
weigh
unis.
more on the world stage. We have to be united
Si
to
nous sommes seuls,
have our voice listened to.
combat
If we are alone and
sera
divided, the
tout
fight
simplement celui du
will
prolétaire
be like
contre.
the weak
le
against
prolétaire.
the strong.
Par contre,
On the other hand,
si le Niger s'unit
if
aux autres
Niger
pays
is
africains,
united with
donne peut
other
changer.
African countries,
la
the
donne
situation
peut
could
changer,
change. The
même
situation
si le
could
PIB
change even
des
if
pays
the
africains
GDP
ne
of
représente que
African
75%
countries represent
de celui
only
d'une
75%
puissance moyenne
of an
comme la
average
France.
size power
La donne
like
peut changer.
France. The situation can
certains
change
facteurs
even if
géographiques
certain geographic
l'Afrique.
factors are handicap for
5 fois
Africa,
plus vaste
5 times
que l'Europe,
bigger
dont
than
le climat
Europe.
tempéré par le Gulf
And
Stream
the
a favorisé le
the
développement.
climate of Europe is much
Elle a
better for,
des zones
for
côtières,
development, much
malheureusement,
less hot.
nettement moins
And
étendu,
Africa
avec peu de ports naturels,
has few
de vastes
natural
déserts,
harbors, it
de
has vast
et
deserts
impénétrables
and
forêts
forests
engendrées par des fortes précipitations et des
because of
températures élevées,
excess
des fleuves
water,
dehors du Nil,
like
non
some
navigables
rivers
à
which are
cause
not
des chutes et des
navigable
rapides.
because they are
La
rapids
donne
and
peut
waterfalls,
changer,
so we cannot use them
car
as an
l'Afrique
infrastructure
unie
for development. But
pourra
things can
mieux
change,
tirer
but
profit
if it is
de
united, Africa
l'exploitation
will be able
de ces immenses
to
richesses
better
minières,
manage its mining,
pétrolières,
oil
hydroélectriques.
and hydroelectrical
Nous n'exploitons
resources.
que
Right now,
5%
we
du
only
potentiel
exploit
hydroélectrique
about
de l'Afrique.
half of all of Africa's potential
Agricole,
for
selon
hydroelectricity.
une étude de la
We
FAO,
have a wealth of
l'Afrique
agricultural
dispose de 60%
resources. We
des
apparently
terres arables
have
inexploitées.
60%
et
of the
forestières.
world's
La donne
unused
peut changer, car l'Afrique
areas
augmentera ses chances
for agriculture.
d'industrialisation
Things can change because
et donc ses
if
chances
we
de sortir
develop industry in
du
Africa,
pacte colonial
we can get
qui en a
out
fait un
for
simple
good
réservoir de
of the
matières premières.
era of
donne peut changer,
colonialism, where Africa
car le
was
commerce
considered only
intra-africain
as a reserve
pourra mieux se
for
développer.
raw materials,
La
because
donne peut changer
intra-African
parce que le
trade
continent
will increase, will
pèse
improve.
en
The
2014
continent in
1
2014
milliard 136 millions
has
d'habitants,
1.1
2
billion people, it will have 2 billion people in 2050. So things can change. If democracy improves in African countries, and if we can create strong institutions in African countries able to guarantee the same rights and enforce the same duties to the African population. Things can change if we end divisions, conflicts, and wars. If we promote good governance, the situation can change if we eliminate or weaken these borders. I was talking to the professor earlier, not by creating new borders, but by integrating more our economies. Ladies and gentlemen, the development of the 2063 agenda of the African Union goes in that direction, controlling its fate, cultural renaissance, Pan-Africanism, democratic governance, peace and security, economic and social development within the context of regional integration, and the assertion of the place of Africa in the world are the major roads and avenues. Pan-Africanism and cultural renaissance will enable us to de-tribalize Africa and overcome centrifugal forces. Promotion of democratic values, promotion of values of liberty, justice, and solidarity will cement our unity in peace and security. On this basis, Africa will be in charge of its own destiny and will not have to wait for the outside world to find solutions for its problem. Africa will develop through the work of its inhabitants and will become less dependent on public assistance for development. Then African countries can develop common policies regarding infrastructure, industry, trade, monetary, budgetary, and fiscal policies, and increase savings. This is what we are doing now at the level of the economic community of West African States, ECOWAS. On this basis, Africa will develop a new partnership, NEPAD, for the development of Africa. And on this basis, intra-African trade will increase, and Africa will weigh more in the international negotiations, especially concerning the conditions of its insertion in the globalization of markets. Because right now, Africa represents only 2% of global trade. Regarding political governance, we also have many progress to be made. I talked earlier about the lack of democratic values in institutions, but it is connected to trade. The states must regulate trade, must regulate labor, and make it fair, including regulating capital and also fighting climate change. The interest of Africa and of the world is to revisit the Washington Consensus. The implementation of this consensus in the 1980s as part of international programs had disastrous effects in Africa, especially in Niger. Austerity, for instance, the fast and uncontrolled privatization and liberalizations have caused drastic budget cuts in many states for social sectors, eliminate grants to agriculture, reduce the salaries of government workers, and causing demonstrations, strikes, and poverty, It has weakened existing industries and also weakened security and defense. And we see the consequences today because in the fact that many African countries are not capable to fight terrorist threats is connected to the fact that the state had become weakened and didn't consider that security concerned them, and it was not a priority in the investments. Instead of that, there was more unemployment, more exclusion, and inequalities. These inequalities developed and grew. And today, we see that half of the world's wealth is owned by 1% of the world population. Half of the wealth in the world is owned by 1% of the people, and the other 99% have to share the remaining 50%. The dictatorship of the market, the invisible hand of deregulation, means that there is no counterpower, but it doesn't work for us. It is my conviction. It doesn't work. We have had proof of that in Niger. The invisible hand leads to crisis, especially financial crisis like in 2008, which you noticed in this country. This crisis revealed the lack of connection between the real economy and the financial sphere. The financial resources, there were huge financial resources which are geared toward speculation instead of promoting a real economy, especially the economy of developing countries. Like, remember what President Truman said, the quote I mentioned, the banking system is now not controlled anymore, no central control. This is the case. I don't speak English well. I hope I will pronounce it well. It's a case of shadow banking, the shadow banking or parallel system and complex derivative products that were created. The world needs a new paradigm, not only for the reasons I mentioned, but also because it is exposed to another threat that is connected to climate change. The interest of Africa and the world is to go back to a development paradigm that would be close to the Bretton Woods consensus. Let's not talk about the Washington consensus. No to the Washington consensus, yes to Bretton Woods consensus with more regulation, with a minimum of regulation. This paradigm requires, of course, a new world governance, a governance based on democratic values that is more inclusive and more equitable. This requires an in-depth change of international institutions. The United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and so on. A united Africa must be an active partner in this reform in order to create a more fair and human world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Merci bien. Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So we have time for just a handful of questions, maybe one from each of the 4 microphones scattered around the room, 2 on the first floor, 2 on the second floor, balcony up there. And for those of you who have not been to a forum event before, the definition of a question in this room has 3 parts. The first is that you must identify yourself. The second is that your statement ought to be brief and concise. And the third is that a question actually ends with a question mark. So with that, the first question for the President.
Mr. President, my name is Guido van Garderen. I'm a senior brand strategist at Interbrand in Africa. Mr. President, you said Africa is the victim of stereotyping and Africa must find its own identity. What would you say is the identity of Niger, and what steps have you undertaken to actually create that brand identity or that nation brand of Niger?
Je réponds au fur et à mesure.
Go ahead, yes, please.
Bien, je vous remercie effectivement.
Thank you
je l'ai dit dans mon
for this
discours,
question. I mentioned that in
si
my
nous
speech.
devons
If
nous développer,
we must,
il faut
if we are to develop
jeunesse.
as,
Il faut
as a
une
country,
identité.
we need an
Parce qu'on a
identity.
été, comme vous l'avez rappelé,
Because,
victime
as you mentioned,
de clichés,
we
de
have been
stéréotypes.
victims of
Et
stereotypes
puis,
and clichés.
notre esprit a
And
été asservi.
Our spirit
Donc, il faut
was enslaved
qu'on se libère.
also,
Qu'est-ce
so
qu'on
we
fait au
have to
Niger
get
par rapport à
free.
ça?
What do we do in Niger in
Dans
this
le cadre
respect?
du programme
In
de
the framework
Renaissance,
of the Renaissance program,
nous avons engagé
we have
cette
begun
renaissance culturelle.
a new
le
cultural
Niger a
Renaissance initiative
Parce que nous sommes
needed
rendus
by
compte que,
Niger, because we understood
toutes
that
les étapes de
all
développement,
the
les
steps
sociétés ont
of
parcouru.
development,
Toutes ces étapes
all these
ont eu
stages
pour support
were supported
des superstructures culturelles.
by cultural
Et c'est ces
superstructure.
superstructures
And
culturelles
this
que nous sommes en
cultural
train de mettre en
superstructure
place.
is what we are now creating
Niger.
in Niger.
Et par exemple,
For instance,
nous sommes
we
déterminés
are
à faire
determined
comprendre aux Nigériens qu'ils ne peuvent
to
sortir
help
de la
the
situation
people to
de
understand
sous-développement
that they cannot
que par leur propre
get
travail.
out of
C'est le travail
underdevelopment
qui crée la richesse.
only by
Nous
work.
devons,
Work creates
combattre
wealth.
cette mentalité
We have
d'assister
to
qui a été
fight
développée des années et
this
des années.
mentality
Et c'est
of
pour cela que
assisted
dans le discours,
people
je disais
counting
qu'il
on
faut que
outside
l'Afrique,
forces
et
to
le
help
Niger en
us.
particulier,
As I said earlier,
s'oriente
it is
plutôt
important
vers le
that
commerce,
Africa
mais vers le commerce équitable,
develops
au lieu
trade, but
d'attendre tout
fair
de
trade,
l'aide publique
instead of waiting
développement.
for
Donc, nous
help
avons
from
cette
foreign governments.
infrastructure
So
culturelle
we have this
que nous sommes en
cultural
train de mettre en
infrastructure
place
that we are trying
afin
to
que
establish
les Nigériens
so that
soient
the
fiers
people of
d'abord
Niger
d'eux-mêmes,
first
afin
be
que
proud of
les
themselves
Nigériens
and
retrouvent
that they
leur
recover
identité,
their
afin que
identity
les Nigériens
in
se
order
débarrassent
that
de
for Niger
l'aliénation
to
qui a toutes les
eliminate this
conséquences de
mental
la
alienation or cultural alienation, which was a
coloniale.
consequence
C'est
of
la
colonialism.
condition
This
d'un
is
nouveau départ.
the
Et ce
condition,
nouveau départ
requirement
que nous sommes
for
en
a
train de
new
préparer à
departure,
travers
and we are starting
la
to
renaissance
bring this about
culturelle
through the
du Niger.
Cultural Renaissance Program of Niger.
Second question?
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Moi, je m'appelle Siti Gofar. Je suis
Thank you.
étudiant à
My
l'université.
name is Tite
Et,
Gofar. I'm
ma
a
question est la
student here, and my
suivante.
question is as follows.
Vous êtes ici aux
You
États-Unis pendant, j'imagine,
have
quelques
been
jours.
here
Et
for a
donc,
few
quels
days in the
sont,
United States.
vos plus grands
What
objectifs
are
pendant
your
votre
main
visite,
objectives
aux
during
États-Unis? Et
this
deuxièmement,
your stay in the
à
United
votre
States?
avis,
And in
quelles
your,
sont
according
les
to
choses
you,
les plus
what are
importantes
the most
que,
important
les
things
États-Unis
that
peuvent,
the United States
peut apprendre
can
de votre
learn
pays?
from your country?
Bien, merci d'abord.
Thank
je
you.
suis venu ici pour cette conférence.
Yes, I came here for this
C'est un
conference.
des objectifs.
This
Et
is one of
puis,
the main
avant de venir
objectives.
ici, j'étais à
But
Washington,
before coming here, I went to
où j'ai eu des
Washington,
rencontres,
and I had
avec,
meetings
la directrice du FMI.
with the head
Parce
of
que le Niger a un
the
programme,
IMF, because
avec,
Niger has
économique et
a program of cooperation
avec le FMI.
with the
J'ai eu
IMF.
également une
I also
rencontre avec
had a
le
meeting
président
with the
de la
president
Banque mondiale.
of
Et
the
là, donc,
World
les
Bank,
trois objectifs.
and these are the three
Rencontre
objectives.
avec le FMI,
Meeting with the
rencontre
IMF,
avec la
meeting
Banque
with the
mondiale,
World
et
Bank,
puis ici,
and then
rencontre avec vous. On est en
meeting
train de discuter.
with you
On est en train
as
d'échanger
we discuss
sur,
and
les
exchange
problèmes,
ideas
de l'Afrique
about the problems of
Niger.
Africa and Niger.
Et enfin,
Finally,
que peuvent faire les États-Unis? je
what
crois,
can the
si j'ai
United
bien
States
compris.
do, if I understood
C'est ça
what you
votre
said?
question.
The
Les États-Unis peuvent
United
faire beaucoup.
States
C'est à dessein
can do
que j'ai rappelé
much.
la citation
And this is
du
why
président
I
Truman.
recalled
pense que
the
il faut que
quotation
les
of
États-Unis
President
reviennent à cette
Truman. The United States have
cette
to go back
conception.
to this vision,
Selon
to
laquelle
this conception of the world
développement
and
du
the
Sud
balance between the North
servira
and the
la
South.
croissance
Development of the South will
Mais si
help
le Sud s'appauvrit,
with the North with development. But if the
il sera
South becomes
extrêmement
even
difficile aux pays
poorer,
développés
it will
de
be
sortir
very
de la crise
difficult
économique et financière.
to developed
Parce que
countries
vous
to
avez
get out
atteint
of
un
the economic
domaine, parce que plus
and
on se
financial
développe,
crisis, because the
moins
more
on peut se développer,
you
c'est
are
la fameuse
developed,
loi
and
des
the
rendements
harder and
décroissants.
harder it is
Mais par
to
contre, vous
bring
pouvez
about
échapper à cette
change.
loi.
But in order, that's the law of decreasing returns. But you can overcome this situation if the South develops, because there was a time when the world could develop by creating new markets, expanding geographically through colonialism, for instance. And when there was a crisis in a country, it was possible to look for new markets. But now the world is a finite area. We cannot expand. We cannot discover new worlds. We cannot find new planets. We have now to develop resiliency of the world economy, and especially the economy of developed countries. In order to develop their resiliency, we have to help develop the markets of underdeveloped countries. This is what will strengthen the world economy, and including northern countries and especially United States economy. It's very simple. This is what I said, the quote from President Truman. This is what I'm expecting from the United States. Of course, we cooperate in many fields, in the field of security, in the fight against Boko Haram. We cooperate tremendously with the United States.
Thank you. Third question.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Je m'appelle Junius Williams.
My name is Julius Williams. I'm a student at Harvard University. How would it be possible to attract international investment because of the number of crises that affect your country? Thank you. Of course, we need in our country to receive direct foreign investment, because when you look at statistics today, we see that Africa is a continent that receives the least amount of foreign direct investments. What do we do? What do we do today to attract these investments? We want investment, of course, that would benefit both parties. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past, where one country was getting a lot more than the other. Both the investor and the host country must benefit from it. This is the basis of our philosophy for trade now. What are we doing? We are building democratic states. We are building states characterized by the rule of law. States that have the institutions required to control investment and make sure that they benefit everybody. For instance, in Niger, we have a public-private partnership framework that works very well, and we have investors who come and invest in these frameworks. There are many provisions, legal provisions, that we have developed to protect their investment. Now, you say that there could be terrorist threats could slow down investment from foreign countries. But you know, in every country there are risks. Terrorism has no boundaries now. What is the most powerful country in the world? Has it been protected against terrorism? No. September 11th happened in New York. So do not believe that we can invest only when there is no risk. I'm saying to foreign investors, come. And right now, Niger is a peaceful country, and security benefits everybody in Niger. Of course, there is terrorism in Mali, in Libya, in Nigeria, on our borders. But right now, there is peace in Niger, and I hope this will continue.
Final question.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'm Teresa from Malawi. I'm a student here. I was just saying I'm Teresa, a student here, and I'm from Malawi. It's refreshing to hear you talk about the need for unity in Africa. And I was wondering, how do you take that beyond the borders of Niger to other African leaders, inspire them, and of course, how does that translate into action? And in the same spirit of unity, is there any effort, deliberate effort amongst African leaders to keep watch on each other to ensure that there is respect of human rights in Africa and respect to democracy?
It is true, this is a difficult issue. As soon as we became independent, we had this problem. Africa was divided. Some people wanted unity, others wanted individual countries. Nkrumah, le président ghanéen, par exemple, so someone like President Nkrumah understood that African countries must unite. But other leaders did not have the same vision. But things are changing. Right now, I mentioned earlier the 2063 agenda. The heads of state of Africa decided to develop some avenues to work on. And this is Pan-Africanism, democracy, and so on. Because in order to be together and work together, we have to have the same values. So little by little, regarding our visions and values, we have to use the same values to share values. Like the European Union. Why are European countries united? Because they share the same values. So at the beginning, we have to identify common values. This is what we are doing now in a perspective of reaching the goals of the 2063 agenda. But there are many efforts that are also done on a regional level. You know, there are 5 regions in Africa. There is West Africa and ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, which I know very well. But we are doing a lot. We are doing many things together in order to strengthen the integration. I talked about the development of railroads between Niger and other countries, 5 countries, Togo, Benin, Niger, Burkina, and Ivory Coast. We are also developing infrastructure in the field of energy, and we work together. At the level of West Africa, we have implemented a common external market, and we have our objective now is to create a single currency, a common currency, which we would call ECO, because of ECOWAS. And I was appointed by the heads of state of the ECOWAS organization to work along with the President Mama of Ghana. And our objective is to ensure that in 2020, the 15 countries of the ECOWAS have a single currency. And this will be done. And it will be a major success. So Africa is changing. And today we are going to do what we can. And we will let you benefit from it later.
Well, unfortunately, I'm afraid we have to close the proceedings now, but I want to thank you for an enormously inspiring and compelling vision of a democratic and prosperous Niger and a secure and cooperative region, and indeed world relations between North and South that are filled with justice as well as harmony. So thank you very much, Mr. President.
Merci.